What is up, everybody? Bluebird here, and welcome back to Cipher Secret, and today we will be reading Chapter 39, Seeking Answers. There you are. Beatrice rolled her eyes upon stumbling on Azaf and Daniel trying to find their way through the forest. She was wondering where they could have gone, luckily managed to find them before any harm came upon the two. Come, follow me, the others are waiting. Don't dawdle around or you'll be left alone here, she told them, but did not wait for an answer before making her way back to the castle. Daniel bit his lip as he looked down. The forest was definitely scarier now that the sun had hidden itself behind the trees that loomed over them. There was no moon either, and thus no moonlight to brighten their path. Perhaps full-blooded demons could have night vision. It was only plausible exception as to why Beatrice hadn't tripped, not even once, whilst the forest made him feel like the clumsiest person to ever exist. Azaf was the only person to prevent his fateful and unfortunate encounter on the ground. On the other side of the coin, Azaf didn't mind the darkness. As his friend, he had gotten used to it from all the time he spent locked into a dark room his sister made especially for him. Hang on a second, Daniel protested as he stopped walking completely. Cue Azaf and Beatrice shooting him a curious glance. Just a few minutes ago it was morning, so how come night came so fast? What time is it now? Beatrice pondered on the answer for a second before resuming on her walking. Azaf and Daniel followed right behind her. She knew the question would come eventually. The Nightmare Realm was a curious place, after all, and, being used to the real world, she was sure the apprentices would not easily get used to the continuously changing times. It's around 11 or 12 in the morning right now, she finally responded, while both Daniel and Azaf stared at her in doubt, as if she was trying to mess with their minds for her own amusement. Oh, come on, who did they think she was? Bill? No, really, it is. The time in the Nightmare Realm is very inconsistent. Sometimes the night is longer than the day. One example is one right now. In some rare cases, night never comes at all. The sun blesses us with its grace all day long. It's hard to get used to it, but we were raised like this, so it may be easier for us to understand. Azaf nodded, very interested in the concept, while Daniel couldn't just wrap his head around it all. You may get familiar with this after a week, but for now, let's forget about that, Beatrice added once the castle was within their view. When they had finally encountered Dana and Dipper, both of them were still with their wings. The two children allowed themselves to relax for a second. Perhaps their day hadn't gone so bad. After all, they could both let their emotions out, and, well, Daniel still had a whole month to be able to fly. He would start practicing tomorrow. It wouldn't stop until he made some progress. Tell me, Dana, Dipper started, looking at one of his wing's feathers on his hand, making Dana look at him. At first, he barely noticed the feather on the floor, but it was clearly his, seeing as it was not only completely black, but slightly larger than Dana's as well. Why are your wings completely white, while mine are bicolored? Dipper thought he might have grown a second head right then and there, due to how Dana stared at him. It was like he was crazy. Perhaps he was, but that was not the case. He could clearly see the difference between black and white. I mean, I get demons are supposed to have white wings, and you're a half-demon, but so am I, and my wings... Dude, your wings are white, she pointed out, cutting him off. No, they're black and white, Dipper corrected her, now getting slightly nervous. No, they're not. She was starting to get frustrated before pulling Kinesi's sleeve. They both needed a second opinion on the subject. Hey, Dipper's saying his wings are black and white, but they're only white, right? I mean, I'm always right anyway, she shrugged. Kinesi turned to face Dipper, or more specifically, his wings. After 5 seconds of intense staring, he looked at Dipper in the eye, and the young boy had never noticed how his eyes were so pink before. It was creepy and almost hypnotizing, since Dipper felt like he could stare at them all day long, and would be comfortable doing so as long as his eyeballs didn't melt. The definite answer felt like an eternity, but the results came very quickly when Kinesi only said 4 words. Dipper, are you colorblind? Now in the room they shared, all 4 apprentices were completely exhausted. Dana lied on her bed, almost at the verge of unconsciousness, while her brother sat next to Azaf and Dipper, who was showing them the book containing all demon words, including Kinesi's name meaning. I knew his name meant something, but I didn't know it was so specific, Azaf explained, tapping his finger on the page with his mentor's name. Daniel leaned a bit closer to get a better view. Dipper pondered on what that could mean. His real name is Bartholomew or something, so why would he even renamed himself Outcast or Traitor? And that was when Dipper froze, realization finally hitting him. How come he hadn't realized that upon reading the meaning right away? Even if he was wrong, it still made some sense. Guys, remember when we met Lucifer? The name still gave him shivers. Perfect. Azaf and Daniel nodded, urging him to continue. During that little argument they had, the members told us how they refused to live with it because of some family affairs. Bill and Beatrice may not have changed their names, but perhaps Knesset did because he was next in throne and didn't want to be remembered because of that. Since he was no longer part of the Nightmare Realm, he considered himself an outcast. Now, for the traitor, I have no idea. Maybe he betrayed someone? We'll have to ask him. Dipper finished. He was really interested in how that would turn out. That's brilliant! Azaf exclaimed, closing the book. Speaking of books, have you read yours already? Dipper's eyes widened as he realized he hadn't even touched his own book, but simply shook his head in the end. Shoot, I forgot. I didn't have time to read it yet, he answered. Who's going to ask Mentor Knesset about the traitor part? Daniel questioned. The three of them looked at each other, expecting one of them to offer themselves for it. Their mentors were quite scary, especially if they didn't want their apprentices to get involved in a certain situation. That reminded Daniel of the time they were suspended from classes for the time being due to the whole incident with Bill's son. Back then, he thought it was stupid, and so did the mentors, and they returned to the lessons shortly after. Albeit understanding to the reasons, that was their problem only, they didn't need children involved. He, however, noticed how the mentors had a protective nature, especially when it came to Lucifer. I'll do it. They all turned around to face Dana. It wouldn't have been unusual if she had simply offered herself to do a favor for them without asking for anything in return yet. This is suspicious, Daniel thought out loud. Go fuck yourself, she jawed with a blank face, though clearly frustration was in her voice. Guys, be polite, Azaf got in between them, attempting to break the fight. Please, would you kindly go fuck yourself, my dear brother? Dana rejoined once again. Azaf could no longer keep a straight face as he joyfully chortled. If looks could kill, both of them would be 6 feet under in that exact moment. At least she did as she told, Azaf thought, but maybe Daniel didn't catch the joke. I'll ask about the name during dinner or lunch or whatever it is now. It'll cause more chaos. This shit will be priceless, she explained with a malicious grin. It was already established that demons could eat, and the mentors did it to gain more energy, so they didn't need to worry about starving. However, they probably should prepare an escape plan in case things went awry. Can't say I didn't expect that, Dipper told them in a nonchalant voice, but with a slight smile on his face. Why did Dana remind him so much of Mabel? Oh, Mabel. He missed her so much. It's Dana. What did you expect from her? Daniel answered while pulling the red sack from one of his pockets from his shorts. The object piqued Azaf's interest. This is what I bought with that gold coin. The cashier said it would make any demon faint, especially for, that guy. His voice dropped slightly, afraid to pronounce Lucifer's name. As if in a blink, he could appear in front of him and steal his soul as punishment. He slowly opened the sack, showing Azaf and Dipper the pills inside. I don't know why I bought such a weird and useless item, but I feel like I could be useful in the future. Daniel wasn't lying. If these small pits could knock out any demon in a few seconds, as he was told, perhaps they could get away with a few things if they got in trouble. Not that he would, but if Dana did something regrettable, and they would have a chance against their mentors, at least. What happens if we give those pills to a normal person? Dana suddenly asked him. That made the three of the children think about the answer. If they're strong enough to make a demon go unconscious, then they'll maybe send a human into a coma, or kill them, Dipper explained. Hopefully, we'll never have to find out. Speaking of the future, you haven't had any visions in an awful while, Af, Daniel pointed out as his friend hopped off the bed. That's when he realized that statement was true. It had been more than 2 weeks, apparently, but he didn't care. Clairvoyance was considered a blessing amongst humans, so much that many of them fake having such ability to draw attention to themselves. For Azaf, however, being able to predict the future quickly wore out as every event of his life became predictable. Obvious that was a surprise since he could see the future as a child. Perhaps that had happened due to his awakening, which was basically puberty, but for demons and the others related to their kind, such as demons and espers. I'm not worried about that. To be fair, I'm kind of glad. Those visions were a pain to bear with. It's like a disease that you can't get rid of, as I've explained. Oh, like cancer, Dana piped up. Though seeing the future can't kill you, she reposted shortly after. It actually can, but that's a story for another time, Azaf countered. Oh no, you're going to explain that to us now, she demanded as he simply rolled his eyes before making his way to the bottom of the bed. As you wish, my liege, he bowed her before sitting down. Perhaps it should have been taken as an offense or joke, but Dana was more surprised than anything, not only because of his phrase, but because he actually avoided to her request. One thing everyone should know about Azaf Horth was that he was an obstinate as one should only imagine, and listening to Dana Sayard, out of all people, was never in his plans. Don't fret, maybe you'll learn something with this as well. How do I start? Well, think of every human action as a snowball. With every roll, the snowball gets bigger and bigger until it cannot be pushed any further due to its prodigious size. Our actions are snowballs. Every human contributes to society in a way that we make it work. Had that not happened, we would have raised ourselves completely. Q. Yes, Mr. Karl, Max 2.0. I understand how democracy works, but I still don't see what that has to do with being able to see the future. Dana cut him off, as if clicked her tongue at her, showing clear displeasure for being interrupted. Had you allowed me to carry on, we would have already finished this. Ha! Savage! Daniel shouted from the top of his bed. He deeply regretted saying that afterwards, as his sister's eyes glowed in a bright blue color, pupils turning into thin slits, as she suddenly went from an impatient child to an erect demon. Let's continue, please, Af. He tried to change the subject. Had he been the only one to notice this? Given Dipper's reaction, then maybe not. Azaf might have noticed as well, but he was under them, on the bottom bed, so it was impossible to see. What really piqued his interest was how Dana had gotten impatient all of a sudden. Her sudden moodiness was very unusual, as she was very rebellious, but otherwise a collected girl. Besides, why did her eyes glow blue? As far as he knew, her magic was black. He would have to search for it later. There's something called butterfly effect. Small things we do have big repercussions, and that's when clairvoyance enters. Some things aren't meant to be changed, or it could alter the fabric of space and time. Say what? Dana raised an eyebrow. In Dana language, shit would go down, Azaf clarified, wishing to continue as to not lose his line of thinking. Some actions are pre-established by Kismet. If a car crash happens, it's because that was meant to be. This may sound cruel, but in reality it's what we live in. When someone like me predicts said car crash, it prevents it from happening. But some things will have adjusted in the future, and thus could cause some major problems like confusion, deja vu, and roughly the end of the world as we know it. If one small action could alter his whole future, what would have happened if he never made the deal with Bill? Would his life be better or worse than it was? Does that mean if one time you're interfered during an accident and let another one happen afterwards, there may be problems? He asked, as I've thought about that for a second. Maybe, unless you travel back in time. We'll never know for sure. Now you made me want to be able to time travel, Dana groaned, but a smirk pierced on her lips. Azaf leaned back on his bed and shrugged. The mentor is probably going to explain this, but since they're not here, seems like I have to do it. Every demon has a special ability. More skills are repeated if they are too common. Like being able to transform into any creature you want, or taking me for an example, a clairvoyance. I, instincts, have Prolouge, which is the ability to see the future. Before you ask, yes, every one of these abilities must have a Latin or Japanese name because, I don't know actually, it just does. Maybe it's a demon thing. You guys must have some sort of power like this too, but you'll only find out what it is after some time. Or never, if you're somehow the unluckiest person in the world. As I took a moment to breathe before continuing his speech. So, in a nutshell, yes, you can go back in time, and if you have the ability to do so. Dana thought about it. How's the ability to travel back in time called in Latin? As I forced his memory slightly. Jacin Ficit, he answered. It roughly translates to time they made, with Jacin meaning time, and the Japanese and Ficit meaning made in Latin. I can understand the Latin stuff, but why Japanese? Daniel questioned him. Japanese is the third language of angels and demons. Second one is Hebraic, the language which the Bible was written. God. He paused, suddenly having an epiphany. Hey, maybe that's why the abilities' names are pronounced in those languages. Dipper pounced off the top of the bed, already putting to use his demon abilities, one of them being the capability of not crushing his bones under serious pressure, and he grabbed his book, which was under the bunk bed. He took a small pause to analyze the book more carefully. It was covered in dust, more than it was back in the shop, and the cover was torn, probably from time, which only made Dipper want to explore its content even more. Aside from that, the book's striking similarity to the third journal sent shivers down Dipper's spine as he analyzed it more carefully. Dude, you're just gonna stare at the cover? That's like the opposite of what a book is made for. Dana snapped Dipper out of his trance that slowly consumed his other feelings towards the book as he forced himself to push the cover aside, the front page seeming to have also suffered a lot in Time's hands. Come on, Dip Dots. Tell us, what does it say? What's the book about? Dana rushed him, and besides his annoyance, it made Dipper feel really nervous. The first words of the book were written in demon language. He could not understand a word of it. However, after the first paragraph, things got fairly easier as the language switched to English, with small bits of Kanjin and what seemed to be Hebrew. It's kind of hard to read it all. The languages keep switching between one another. Everything is erratic and troublesome, Dipper informed them. Perhaps they would know how to deal with that, especially Azaf, although he was slightly bitter about it. He had to admit Azaf was perhaps slightly wiser than him, and thus he lost the role of the smart one, going from that awkward boy, but perhaps a prodigy would fit him. He had developed more abilities earlier than any of them, after all, but it would be a matter of time before they caught up with him. Excuse me. They all jumped around to turn to face the unknown guest, who, by the clothing and polite countenance, seemed to be a maid or servant of the castle. The servant's black hair was shoulder-length, and was highly unfitting for her dark skin, though her voice was soft, maybe, the most confounding sound the apprentices had heard in 2 days. My lieges have called you to announce dinner has been prepared. If you may, they would like your presence downstairs. And with that announcement, she left the room, closing the door behind him. After the maid was gone, Dipper sighed and closed the book briskly, disinclined to continue reading, unwillingly forming a cloud of dust around the room that quickly disappeared. I guess we should go? Daniel asked upon seeing none of his friends would budge. I have a bad feeling about today, Azaf suddenly told them. I can't see exactly what it is, but something bad is going to happen. Then he turned to Dipper, eyes narrowed. And it's going to happen to you. Dinner went on as great as one would expect. The first minutes were spent in silence, as Dipper barely paid mind to the food itself, which was turkey and mashed potatoes and rice. Not a bad combination, in his opinion. He couldn't stop thinking about what Azaf had told him. Something bad would happen to him? It couldn't be, could it? He'd never seen Azaf predict the future, not even once, but even if he did, he would most likely not interfere, and thus it would be impossible to know if one action could be predicted or not. However, the gears in Dipper's head began grinding. Would that happen to him in the castle? If so, he could prevent anything bad from happening to him by simply going outside for a few hours until it was safe to return. He would definitely have to ask Azaf about that later. On the other side of the table, Dana was tapping her fingers on the table with a poker face, and Dipper knew exactly what that meant. It was time for questioning. Okay, so I was thinking, this is not a good thing, is it? Beatrice cut off her apprentice before anything inappropriate could be asked. Upon doing this, she noticed how the children squirmed and fidgeted in discomfort in their seats, and then that hit her that it wasn't just Dana's thought, it was a collective thought. They might have had the same idea in their room, but Dana seemed to be the one willing to ask questions about it without being judged. As it was expected of her to ask more direct questions from time to time, Beatrice looked at the siblings, expecting some sort of reaction. They did the same thing to her. Letting out a sigh, she nodded and asked Dana. Asked the question already. So, Dana started, sucking in a deep breath between gritted teeth. Remember when you guys gave us these coins? The three mentors nodded. We all bought stuff, but Af bought a book with lots of words in demon language and what they mean. Sort of like a dictionary. He showed us that the book has Mentor Kinesi's name on it, and it means outcast or traitor. I don't remember well. So, we wanted to know why he chose that name. She stopped, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. During their conversation in the room, she thought it would be funny to get a reaction from the mentors, but after saying she felt wrong, everything was wrong with this. That's because your old name was Bartholomew or something similar, so you obviously changed your name, Azaf added. The reaction they got was unlike anything the apprentices expected. All the mentors were surprisingly calm about this, especially Kinesi, despite being the one who was being spoken about. I thought you might figure it out one day or another, the pink demon responded, his voice collected and very soft. He leaned against the table, resting his chin on one of his hands, elbows on the table. I also know you won't give in until I give you the answer sought, so I have no other choice. Beatrice gaped at her brother. How would Kinesi scumble so easily to their apprentice's wishes? It was unlike him. She thought he would at least put up a few more fights than this. Well, that was easy, Daniel whispered to Azaf, who bit inside his cheek of nervousness. It was like they were reading Beatrice's mind. By now, it might be common knowledge that I was the one to inherit Lucifer's throne in political terms. But while Beatrice should have been the true heir, and she was the oldest, because she is a female, her rights were denied. I did not want to be king, nor did Bill or Bee. He started explaining, trying his best not to let any detail slip. Dana furrowed her brow upon hearing the last statement. Whoa, hang on. If you didn't want to be queen, then why did you get all worked up over the damn throne? She asked her mentor. Beatrice shrugged. It was a matter of pride, the older demon answered nonchalantly. Of course it was, Dana replied, rolling her eyes. As I was saying, we quickly got tired of being treated as Lucifer's pawns before deciding to run away. Our departure wasn't a surprise for the Nightmare Realm, obviously. They knew, how much effort we put into being princes and princesses, Azaf snickered. Kinesis sent him a glare of confusion and doubt. Maybe he felt attacked by the action, but Dipper didn't know why Azaf would laugh in the first place. The room fell deadly silent. No one dared make a sound. The room was deadly silent. No one dared make a sound, because the story was certain to get interesting. It was only in rare moments that Dipper had the pleasure to listen to such enthralling stories. What's so funny? You said earlier demons didn't have a sense of sarcasm, he pointed out. Well, you caught me. Kinesi curved his lips into a grin. Before I carry on, does anyone have anything else to say before I get interrupted once again? The room was pierced with an unsettling silence. Good. Once we were far away from the place we all dared call home, we took new identities. Bill and Bee chose to shorten their name to something simpler, while I completely changed mine. Something about my name seemed off to me. If I only cut it in half like my siblings, my name would still control me and make me feel like the prince I used to be. I still use my powers on some rare occasions to check on the realm we left behind and see if there were any rumors about us or if someone acknowledged our disappearance. Surprisingly, they did, and we gained a new name. Kineses, meaning traitors. And outcasts too, right? Dipper asked him, making sure the story was truly over. Kinesi nodded at him. That's very interesting. Dana, are you okay? Dana noticed how his sister was very, very focused on her plate. Something very unusual. Her eyes were no longer tinted into their characteristic green, but now made of various hues of blue, exactly like Beatrice's. Dana? He asked again, now getting worried about her. Everyone's attention shifted to Dana once they noticed how she had been way too quiet for an awful while. Azaf and Dipper's eyes widened once they no longer paid mind to Dana, but to her plate instead. Cracks were starting to form under the dish, expanding to other areas of the plate as well. The food looked like it was being squashed under an anvil. Once the plate started shaking, the three apprentices understood it was time to stop and started ducking under the table before this dish simply exploded, food and glass shards going everywhere. The mentors did not move. Instead, they used their psychic powers to avoid being hit by the cracks or parts of the meal, and Dana was completely unharmed, a bit covered in turkey and mashed potatoes. As soon as it was safe to return, the apprentices peeked from under the table and returned to their seats, making sure there was nothing on them. Dana removed a piece of glass from his hair before sitting. Urgh. She grunted upon returning to her old self and gaining control of her mind once again. What happened? She looked at herself and saw the mashed potatoes in her lap. Oh, please tell me this is food. Daniel pleaded with a small flash of disgust on her face. The other three children in the room looked at their mentors, hoping for an answer. Well, that was unexpected. On the second day, too, Beatrice thought out loud, before turning to Dana. It seems like you've found your special ability.